Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today we join Professor Rajeev Srinivasan, adjunct professor at IIM Bangalore for innovation. Rajeev, welcome to PGurus channel.
Thank you very much, Sri. Good to be back here again.
So Rajeev, as you can see, I'm standing in front of a hotel building in Bangkok, and I have the beautiful palace and the backdrop as well as the downtown. And this is where the RCEP meeting concluded, in which Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, walked away from the RCEP agreement. Now, a lot has been said about why it was appropriate for the Prime Minister to walk away from the thing, but I don't think anybody has done a pros and cons of making such a decision, taking such a decision. What are your thoughts on what happened, what India stands to gain, and what India stands to lose?
Well, Sri, this is one of those dilemma kind of situations because I, among other people, I suppose, have this concept of free trade as an unmitigated good. That is to say, we believe that trade, in fact, brings benefits to both the trading parties and goes back to that old idea from Ricardo, an economist named Ricardo, who said that, if you're good at making rice and this other country is good at making ships, well, let them make ships and you make rice and then you trade, and both parties are better off, instead of you making ships where you're not very good at it and the other guys making rice when they're not very good at it. So that's inherently and intuitively a reasonable thing to say. And furthermore, we have seen that increased trade empirically has been beneficial across the world. Trade has helped people become far more prosperous. It, of course, has its downsides in terms of climate change and having to ship all these goods across the Atlantic or the Pacific, and that adds to the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, etc. But on average, the pluses seem to outweigh the negatives. So I would say, as someone who has kind of been brought up on that orthodoxy about free trade being a good thing, I'm a little bit unhappy about India apparently missing the boat on this large trading bloc. Now, let's also point out that this is not the first time India has missed the boat. There are innumerable times, but in particular about ASEAN, the Southeast Asian group. It's tragic in a way that when ASEAN was being formed, they asked India to be a founding member. And of course, I won't mention who it was, but our great leader at the time said, "Oh, no, we don't want to be a part of ASEAN because you're not very important. We are West focused. We're much more interested in what the UK does and the US does and so forth." That was idiotic. Obviously, it turned out in hindsight that 20 years later, ASEAN became a very powerful economic bloc, and we started begging to be let in. And they said, "Okay, maybe we will let you in as an observer or something, but we really don't want you," because at this point in time, ASEAN, especially some of the economies like Singapore and maybe Malaysia and Thailand to an extent, they've overtaken India. India is, comparatively falling. So we made a mistake there. So the question arises, is this RCEP again something where we missed the bus, and 20 years later we're going to look back and say, darn, we had a chance to become part of this organization, which would be about 30% of the world's population and probably more than that in terms of its GDP, and they're going to trade amongst each other and become well off. And it also includes a couple of developed nations, Japan, of course, and Australia and New Zealand. And we could have been a major supplier of something to them, and we could have run to all sorts of trade with them. And why did we miss that opportunity? So that's the downside of having missed out on this RCEP process.
Now, I have a doubt here, Rajeev. Now, this holds true maybe 30, 40 years ago, but ever since manufacturing moved east, I mean, whether it was Taiwan or Korea, it started with Japan. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and now China, and perhaps Vietnam, the design aspect of any product got separated from the manufacturing aspect. Now, the wisdom was that as long as the design is correct, it can be manufactured anywhere. And even if you take agriculture, the design is being done by companies like Monsanto, which sells the seeds, and these seeds, are being used to harvest crops. Now, in such a situation, all else being the same, and that's a big all else being the same, the country that has the lowest cost of labor should come up with the best product, all else being the same, right?
Well, the two responses to that. One is a paper that was written by David Teese of the UC Berkeley campus some years ago. I forgot the exact title, but among other things, he talks about the fact that the idea of separating design and manufacturing is a myth. He says that if you lose the ability to manufacture, then eventually you lose the ability to design. Because unless you design for manufacturability, you will not be able to get the best designs out there. And that's happening to an extent these days in electronics. You're finding that.
Yeah, sorry, I have both sides. I mean, I have pros and cons on that. Just that one limited point. I just wanted to bring it out and we can continue. You can continue. I just wanted to say that it's true in some fields and not true in other fields, but please continue.
Yeah, the other part of what you said about Monsanto, as you're probably aware, Monsanto is a pretty bad word, dirty word in India for a variety
Yes,
of
it is. Yes, it is. I was just merely explaining that as an example. Please continue. Please continue. Yeah.
No, but I'd like to digress for a minute on Monsanto.
Sure. Go ahead.
This friend of mine named Arvind Kumar, he came up with an interesting theory about 2 years ago, which he published in the Sunday Guardian, which says that the reason we have these massive smog problems in Delhi is because of something that is a chain started by Monsanto. Apparently, Monsanto influenced the governments of Punjab and Haryana to delay their planting and their harvest, which meant that instead of the harvest happening in August or something, it's now happening in October, and they have to then plant the next crop very quickly. And for that, they need to quickly get rid of the stubble. And that's the bottom line behind the smog, because they have to burn the stubble. So it's an interesting theory. But I also have some other friends who are people who are very concerned about the environment, and the fact that genetically modified Monsanto crops are a big issue is not only an Indian, but a worldwide phenomenon that many people on the green side are very concerned about. And even there is a lot of resistance to the idea that Monsanto and other Western crop companies make the seeds, and then we just are sort of labor that brings it to market. Because there is the other side of it, which is that we had indigenous seeds, an immense variety of indigenous seeds, for example, in rice. And there is the allegation that M.S. Swaminathan, who is lionized in many ways as the originator of the Green Revolution and so forth, it is alleged that he helped a lot of these seeds be shipped to the International Rice Research Institute in Manila, which is effectively biopiracy, because we have stopped cultivating a large number of seeds or varieties of rice. We now have a few of these Green Revolution varieties, which I'm a believer that monotheism, monocrop, all those things, where you have just one alternative, is a huge problem. As another example, we have in the US, when you say banana, it's just one kind of banana, right? The Cavendish. That is highly vulnerable to a pest. And it's entirely likely that one fine day you won't have any bananas anymore, because that's fallen prey to this pest. It happened once before. So when you're talking about reducing biological diversity, it's a huge problem. So that's just a digression on on the RCEP. But there is some relevance to that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to butt you.
Yeah, there's some relevance to that, because again, if we join the RCEP, we will be bombarded with agricultural products from Australia and New Zealand, and they're far more efficient than we are. I also read somewhere some years ago that every cow in Japan is subsidized to the tune of $7 a day. Now, you can't compete with that, because you've already seen that with the Farm Bill in the US.
Hmm.
There is a $20 billion subsidy that's given to farmers of 5 crops: cotton, wheat, rice, soy, and one more that I can't remember at this time. And that means there is tremendous distortion. In effect, cotton farmers in India find that they just cannot compete with American cotton farmers, and that leads to deaths, suicides. People just cannot survive on the margins because the margins become negative. So there are huge implications in agriculture which are not so visible. That's one of the problems with jumping into RCEP when we're not ready. So I think the fundamental argument about going into RCEP is twofold today. One is the predatory practices of China. And in effect, RCEP is China's baby. And we are already seeing how even the Diwali crackers and all kinds of temple paraphernalia in India, these are all manufactured in China. And that means a whole lot of small, micro, and medium-sized entrepreneurs have gone out of business in India. So that's a concern. And the second concern is this big impact on agriculture. And there's probably a third in terms of the impact on our generic drugs industry, because the way it's been written, our drug production is very helpful thing, because even after joining WTO, India's drug prices are considerably lower than the prices in the West. And we need to keep it that way, because otherwise we cannot afford to treat our large population.
Well, I just wanted to add one more point to what you mentioned about Monsanto. The Monsanto seeds force you to buy the seeds again from them. You cannot use the seeds from a previous harvest as a starting point for the next one. And that, to me, is a big no-no. That means essentially you are killing all your native. I mean, I'm in agreement with you on that, Rajiv. And there are so many other crops that India is just waking up to. For example, millets. And millets is a huge, healthy crop. I mean, if you eat millets, it can control your weight much better than rice and wheat do. And India is just waking up to that. And therefore, so I see a problem there. But my point of even bringing all this along was, what if India were to make it easier, do away with a lot of the bureaucratic red tape and make it easier? Do you think that in that event, India would be able to successfully compete?
So that's why the Monsanto crop, the seeds are called terminator seeds, because you essentially end up being enslaved by them. You have to keep buying the seeds year after year. And that pretty much militates against everything that farmers have, for millennia done, which is you save a little bit of your crop for the seed.
Right,
but
right.
Here, it's an annuity for Monsanto. And this is part of the reason why it's considered a very predatory company. So there are many issues there, but the crop diversity laws, and you were mentioning millets, coarse grains as they call them, and they used to be very popular in India, but now we've supplanted the coarse grains, partly as a result of the Green Revolution, with just rice and wheat. In Karnataka, though, I find that jawar and ragi are relatively more frequently used, and so you can get ragi mude or ragi dosha and things like that. To be honest, they're not very tasty compared to the rice and wheat-based alternatives, but it's like quinoa. Quinoa, this Andean millet, which is now sold as some kind of health food at a very high price in fancy stores in the US. I'm pretty sure that soon ragi and millet, ragi and jawar and the other coarse grains from India will end up being health food, and that will bring them back, I suppose, to a limited extent.
Oh, they already are. They're a big hit. Sorry, Raji, they're a big hit in the United States. And the reason they're a big hit is because they effectively control your weight. You can effectively control your weight by eating these things. The only challenge with using millet-based food is often these things have to be soaked overnight. So if you forget to soak it overnight, then you can't make it the next day. So there are some small things like that. But what people are doing is to address the taste factor. What they do is they progressively add more millet to the base dough. For example, if you think of batter of dosa, you progressively add millet to that until a point where you start getting to enjoy the taste, the new taste. And I have had millet dosa. I've got ragi dosa. I do these things all the time at home, and I'm very, very happy to say that somehow there's a balance that has been found in the outlets that sell these things in the United States, and they're quite tasty.
Okay, that's good to know, because I guess multi-grain is probably the answer. And one more thing about these millets. In India, they have been cheap because they've been seen as the poor man's food.
Yes,
But
yes.
there is an interesting phenomenon, which is that today, because of TV, you know what the poor man eats? They eat Maggi noodles
Right,
because
right.
they think that is the aspirational food that rich people eat. And I'm not exaggerating. You know, people, daily laborers go and buy Maggi noodles, and that's what they feed their children. And one more thing about millets is that they have low glycemic index, so they will fend off the onset of diabetes for a lot
Yes.
of people. It's also a very
In
good thing.
fact, that
So
is the primary reason why people go gravitate towards millets. Many families in their 30s, the adults start, contacting diabetes, and millets is a very effective deterrent.
yeah, so that goes back to the whole question of what are the second order effects, okay? Because if we are bombarded with Australian and New Zealander milk and agricultural products, our cattle breeds, just like our grain breeds or grain varieties, cattle breeds are under threat. You know, we used to traditionally have these zebu varieties, the humped cattle, but today they're disappearing. I went to a temple in Kerala and I went to the Goshala, and I was startled to see that the cow, or sorry, the bull, the ceremonial bull that the temple has, is a Jersey. It doesn't have a hump.
Oh my
And what
God.
it means is that in Kerala, the humped cattle are pretty much extinct. And that is also a big negative. So it will, this RCEP would hasten the demise of Indian varieties in a bunch of different areas. So that's one of the problems.
Interestingly enough, we in the Bay Area, in fact, some parts of United States now, we get the milk called as A2, which is essentially the milk from Bos Indicus breed of cows. We get that, and we use it for the last 1 year. I've been using it. It's a little bit expensive compared to the normal buffalo milk, but it aids in digestion, and it's much more conducive for us because you and I we were brought up on these kinds of milks when we were growing up. I mean, this is not just this one generation. It's been there for many, many, years. I don't know about you, but when we used to have land and when we used to have a village house, the house had an adjacent thatched roof thing
Stable.
where yeah, stable. And we had a lot of cows. It was just cows. Vegetarian families don't, have others. We had cows, and they were everything was self-contained. The bulls were there and the cows were there, and the bulls used to help out in cultivation, and of course they also were procreating. So this Bos Indicus cow is a unique breed, and I'm really hoping that it doesn't go into extinction. If you look at the case of China, for example, today I believe their the cow population that they have, it's only fit for consumption as beef. I don't know, luckily for China, most of the population is lactose intolerant, so they don't seem to miss milk a lot. But what I've heard is that in one of their famines, they killed their entire cow population. So, but India shouldn't meet that kind of a fate. We have a very robust, diverse set of foods and fauna and flora, and we should maintain that. But other than that, do you see any other downside? But does India have a plan, you think, to catch up and join it? Because there would be benefits for Indian goods also, like for example millets.
Yeah, my belief is that we've not said no, and
Okay.
everybody was very diplomatic about it. And even the other participants in RCEP said we will be open to further negotiations, and we hope that India will join at a future time. But at this point, we cannot wait any longer. We've been negotiating this for 7-8 years, so we have to go ahead and bring this into effect. So yeah, India and the other RCEP members have all left the door open, and that I think is in many ways a compromise, where the lobby that says we'll never join RCEP because of a variety of reasons, and the other guys, the free traders, who say join it. they both know that India is not really ready for it yet. So a little bit of a delay, especially as we are building up our infrastructure. We are taking a number of steps to improve the lives of rural people and also MSMEs. So there might be a point in future where we're a little bit more ready to jump into this agreement, or even something like a Trans-Pacific Partnership. If you remember, that was led by the US, and it's kind of now rudderless because the US pulled out. So India would like to be in these large multi-country partnerships. However, the other thing that India has done is bilateral treaties, just like the US is doing. We have bilateral treaties with Japan, Taiwan, I think, and Thailand, and several other countries. And what I read is that, you know, we have not really gained a great deal from these individual bilateral treaties, because before we signed these treaties, our trade deficit was X, and now our trade deficit is 2X, which fundamentally means that, you know, India as a trading nation is a consuming nation at this point, rather than a supplying nation. Yeah. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know if that's a viable or sustainable thing. Can we continue to consume? You know, what are we paying for all this with? You know, we don't have like, you know, secret stores of gold or anything. So I don't know if that's a long-term, but it appears as though today, you know, China is a massive exporter, export-led power. We're a massive import-led power, which also has its consequences, right? We have buyer power. We can say to people, hey, we don't like you, we won't buy your stuff, as we recently said to Malaysia. We said, you know, you're rude to us, therefore we're going to stop buying your palm oil. And Malaysia is a little unhappy, and I hope India really follows through on that. And same thing with Turkey, where we said to them, look, you said something in support of Pakistan and against Kashmir, so we're going to stop buying ships from you or something. So yeah, as a major buyer, regardless of whether we're an RCEP or not, we still have significant buyer power. And I think we may end up writing more bilateral treaties. So I don't see, for example, as we move forward into the geopolitical quad, why we shouldn't have a treaty with Australia and maybe a treaty with Vietnam or Indonesia or something like that. So those things will continue in the background. The fact that this Big Bang thing didn't happen doesn't mean we're turning into a total protectionist nation at all.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah.
So I don't think this is the end. This is just an intermediate stop in that transition of India from being sort of nowhere in the trade picture to one that is strongly integrated into the supply chains of various countries, of various goods and so forth. I mean, today, we're also, even with our RCEP, as a result of the overflow of manufacturing into Vietnam. You know, Vietnam was the first choice for most countries pulling out of China.
Right.
Most countries, most companies pulling out of China. But Vietnam is now getting saturated. They simply have reached a point where they don't have enough people or enough infra to take on all this stuff. And so the overflows come into India and maybe to Malaysia and so forth. So we will get there eventually. But GST, for example, in my opinion, is a big plus, because GST reduces the amount of time it takes you to transport goods around the country, because you don't have all those damn checkposts.
Yes.
I remember earlier, you would have a mile-long queue at a state border, which made no sense whatsoever.
Right. That's true. Well, some good and some work to do. So I guess we will see how things play out. Thank you very much, Rajeev, for your thoughts on RCEP. And we will come up with more such interesting topics to discuss about. Especially we talked about the, what do you call that, public key infrastructure, crypto, and that we will be doing it very shortly. Encryption, the pluses and minuses, quantum computing, how it affects all this stuff. So we'll be having some very interesting conversations. Thank you very much, Rajeev.
Thank you for having me.